I mean, just going back to the original analogy, I mean, so much of the law and so much of the way that the law is conceived in the United States, and particularly at the federal level, is conceived of as being this, kind of grand concrete structure, when in reality, it really is this amalgam of this patchwork. And, kind of to pull it back, I know a little bit to your notes. I mean, it's about, and kind of what Nova said kind of at the beginning of the episode, it's about, so much of due process is essentially about creating regular outcomes, right? Creating predictable outcomes, creating outcomes that are, to the extent that they are bipartisan, are ones that are about creating a safe play space for capital, correct? I mean, there's about creating this very, that's the purpose of these norms. I mean, in the field in which I work, there's been significant amount of debate. I mean, the last time that the United States passed significant labor legislation was 1947. I mean, maybe maybe the early 1950s, but it's been a significant period of time. And there's been a ongoing conversation within a lot of folks in the labor movement, particularly over the course, since the Reagan era, particularly over the last 20 years, about whether the settlement of the National Labor Relations Act was something that was really worthwhile, whether that was something that, unions still actually benefit from, this, attempt at labor peace between labor and capital. And I think that, what you're seeing now, where very recently Gwen Wilcox, who was one of the National Labor Relations Board members, was, unlawfully fired by the Trump administration. She's now been put back to work, but that's currently being appealed. And there's a very good chance that the Supreme Court is going to overrule the precedent that'll, prevented the Trump administration arguably from firing her. At the point where that agency then loses a quorum and becomes non-functional, is it then, on one hand, that is seen as a victory by a lot, by Musk, by the Trump administration, by a lot of the, management forces, by the tech billionaires backing Trump. But at the same time, one of the factors that made the National Labor Relations Act worthwhile is that it would create a way of regulating the labor strife that roiled the country in the 1930s. And if we lose that at that point, I mean, going to your point, Riley, it's one of those things where someone's going to be able to rebuild that, but it's kind of an open question as to what that rebuilding is going to look like.
Yeah, or what the damage would be from not having it. I mean, it always struck me that laws, it's an arena, right, in which you can kind of fight capital on sort of like a defined set of terms, and you can win and you can make gains that way to a point. But there's the trade-off of that, of being kind of constrained within the system that kind of serves as a kind of bit of a safety valve for sort of like for capital, right? And then legitimizes some of that too. And I think all you can really say now is that we're definitively at the end of that at the moment, because the people in charge have absolutely no interest in it. And I think there's the really interesting inflection point to me is where, if you were a judge, right, if you're a federal judge who is fully on board with this, you're like Federalist Society or whatever, you are personally massively racist, etc., etc., etc. Are you willing to sort of like gleefully incinerate your whole profession along with it in order to achieve that or not? And I don't know the answer to that.
I guess it depends how many doodads you've been purchased by whatever billionaire pats you on the head and lets you sleep at the foot of his bed. Yeah,
how many orbs you've been given over the last fiscal quarter. Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. And I think you've already kind of seen over the course, particularly since Obama, when you saw the rise of, what's called forum shopping, where you have courts, where you have plaintiffs bringing suits in various different courts around the country that are thought to be friendly to them, particularly during Obama, it was a lot of the districts out in Texas, the Western District of Texas, because there aren't that many judges there. They're almost all, John Birch conservatives. And so as a result, you could bring a lawsuit there and get a nationwide injunction against something like, the ACA, the minimum wage, something like that, in fairly short order. That then went back the other way during the Trump administration. A lot of the suits that were brought during the first Trump administration were brought at the Ninth Circuit out on the West Coast, because those were thought to be more friendly courts. And now they're being brought in the First Circuit up in New England.
And the result of that, it feels like, is whenever there's like an injunction or a temporary restraining order, Trump or any of his guys will essentially say somebody's got to kill this guy, and put a picture of the judge on Fox News.
Yeah, I mean, it's won't somebody rid me of this meddling priest? It's just over and over again. And so as a result, you have this gradual breakdown of there being any sort of real legal and judiciary consensus, where these are increasingly just different fiefdoms that are kind of go to the spoils of the victor one way or another. I mean, obviously, the Supreme Court is now going to be lost for at least a generation.
It was interesting that the Chief Justice responded to this exact kind of stochastic thing by being like, well, it's nice to be nice, please don't be mean to federal judges.
Like, John Roberts quoted as saying to President, "It takes more muscles to frown than to smile."
just very lightly, just kind of like, hey, stop that. Which to me seems insufficient, but what do I know?
And all of this, once again, just really goes back to the fact that we really haven't had all that active of a legislature for, several decades now. You have brief moments of bipartisan consensus around things like passing, the Patriot Act or, whatever, or, the crime bill in the 90s or something like NAFTA. But by and large, you really have the Senate and the House almost completely grinded to a halt, particularly over the course of the last 10 to 20 years. And so through that, both, you've seen first and with Bush, then with Obama, now with Trump, and, with Biden, you've seen the increasing evidence of rule by executive fiat, which, goes to the entire unitary executive theory, where, you increasingly just have, right now, as we currently record this, Trump has said that he is going to dismantle the Department of Education, notably without the keeping the part of it that administers student loans, because we have to make sure that we still do debt collection, but that the rest of the entire secretariat is going to be dissolved. And so you just increasingly have, the Mad King sitting on his throne, just tossing out edicts and seeing which ones stick.
And that's been getting to a real kind of an even more frightening place with the U.S. Institute of Peace thing.
I would say we're going to get there. But I wanted to just sort of step back for a little bit, and I wanted to go back to some of these. Now that we sort of talked about like the broad relationship between the powers, I want to talk about some of the other specific things that the administration is doing. We've noted, like unilaterally dismantling agencies with a statutory basis, as well as impounding payments, which is its own sort of crisis. But I wanted to talk a little bit about how they are doing it. And the question is, are they dissembling? I.e., they're saying, okay, well, that judge said we had to have the planes turn around where we were flying these like Venezuelan migrants to like the torture prison in El Salvador, right? Actually, it was in international waters, so it was out of that judge's jurisdiction. Versus, dissembling like that. Or what they're doing is they're saying, okay, well, no, we're not eliminating U.S. aid. We're just reducing it to what we consider to be its statutory minimum, right? And those are saying, oh no, we're not breaking the law. Versus gloating, right? Which is we're going to brag that our actions are in defiance of court orders, and we urge you to do something about it because you can't.
I do feel like the gloating is baked in, whether they're kind of trying to assume the color of law or whatever, because they did like the deportation flight specifically was like open defiance, right? But I think that whether or not they and then you had this kind of like hurried thing that resulted in, oh well, we're not actually just ignoring the court order. It was just kind of it was a fait accompli that we'd already done the deportations. But Nayib Bukele was still doing the gloating post, right?
Yeah.
And Rubio like retweeted that shit, which is informative, I think.
Yeah, it's not a crime if it happened in the past. If the court finds you doing it after you've done it, then you're free. You
federal judges typically like that argument.
Yeah.
No, that's I'm going to try that the next time that I appear in front of one of them. We'll see how well it works out for me. I'm sure it won't end up with me in contempt.
Yeah, but the other thing I wanted to mention, though, as well, right, is noting sort of some of the people who were on that flight, right, is they were saying, okay, well, we know that they're all gang members and terrorists, and we're not going to supply any evidence of that to anybody because they're enemy combatants. This was the kind of logic that was used to get people like Omar Khadr or Maher Arar sent to Guantanamo Bay during the War on Terror. In the case of Omar Khadr, he was alleged to have thrown a grenade when I believe he was just like wounded in a gunfight and then blamed for the death of an American officer, then taken to Guantanamo Bay. Maher Arar, both these guys are Canadian, incidentally. Maher Arar was set up by Canadian intelligence and the RCMP as an Al-Qaeda associate who then was like arrested and sent to Guantanamo Bay based on just like knowing someone who knew someone who knew someone. And in both these cases, right, like the people who were actually on that deportation plane, it's now being like, filed essentially, were sort of rounded up under equally suspicious circumstances.
Yeah, like has tattoos.
Yeah,
essentially.
One guy was like, he had a tattoo of the Real Madrid logo that was used as proof of gang membership, and that he had a social media post like with making finger guns.
I mean, that's also not new in the sense that administratively that it's been that way for as long as I think anyone can remember in terms of like determining gang affiliation, right? If you look at like any state prison system in the US, there's a lot of that that I've read about. So yeah, it's just trying to elevate that to we can now take someone to El Salvador off of this.